Thanks, Ben. Daryl, I now feel like we are closer because you're a gay left-wing crazy person, apparently, which we fully embrace here at CAP. So you're. But I actually happen to know you're not. I think you consider yourself, though you are known for keeping politics out of your work, you consider yourself personally a conservative. And I don't want to focus so much on on your personal statuses, though. I would like to instead focus on your areas of expertise. So maybe you could just start out by explaining what your group, what role your group had at DHS, and how that integrates with law enforcement at the local, state, federal level, and to the extent that you know, what is DHS doing now in those same areas?
Sure, Henry. Thanks for having me. In 2004, I was asked to come over to Homeland Security and stand up a domestic terrorism team, which is a group of analysts that would look at non-Islamic terrorism in the United States. And that was my area of expertise. DHS had tried to recruit me for nearly a year to pull me away from ATF, federal law enforcement agency that I worked with. And finally, after a year, I decided that the department, because there were so few resources in the federal government that look at this issue, I felt kind of an obligation to my nation as well as to the department to go over and to take on this challenge. And so over the course of a year, we went out and advertised positions. We were able to hire a number of analysts, some of which had backgrounds in this area. Others had law enforcement backgrounds but dealt with immigration issues within the department and protecting federal buildings. So over the course of a year or so, I was able to recruit and hire 5 other analysts, and we began to look at this issue throughout the country. And what we did, contrary to what some of these news reports had portrayed, we weren't interested in, conservative, or liberal organizations that are mainstream, law-abiding people that feel a civic duty to participate in politics. We're interested in the bad guys, the people that pick up the gun and build a bomb and go out and harm other people. So that's what our job was, to basically analyze terrorists and violent extremists on all sides of the political spectrum, as well as those that had single-issue causes. And what made us different than the FBI is that we were an intelligence agency, a domestic intelligence agency, rather than a law enforcement agency. So at the Department of Homeland Security, the office that I worked in is called the Office of Intelligence and Analysis. And their mission is basically to analyze terrorism from a strategic perspective, the big picture, what's going on nationally, looking for trends, talking about what particular extremist movements we felt were dangerous, that had long histories of violence and criminal activity. And so that was our job, and that's made us unique, that we looked at these issues not from a law enforcement perspective. Okay, we didn't have to prove probable cause or have necessarily a criminal predicate to investigate. We didn't do any investigations. All we did was gather information and analyze it. And so through this, we were able to produce a number of strategic intelligence reports, one of which was the report on right-wing extremism. And you'd probably be interested to know the bipartisan nature of the work that we did. We actually produced an intelligence assessment on left-wing extremists and their cyber attack capabilities just a few months before the right-wing extremist report was written and released. So we produced these strategic analysis reports. We also provided valuable training to police officers and also fusion centers. And something that's missing now is the fact that we had a number of analysts at DHS going out and giving these trainings. Sometimes we would do in upwards of 9, 10 per month, training the new police officers that were coming out of the academies, training the new analysts who were just straight out of college on these extremist movements and their histories, of violence and how they radicalize, how they recruit people. And that valuable training is no longer being given, at least not to the scale that was being done prior to 2009. We also did a little bit of internet monitoring. Again, we weren't law enforcement, so we couldn't go on covertly and take on anonymous personas and interact with people. We did what's called passive internet monitoring. We went to publicly available information websites to see what the extremists were chattering about. And believe it or not, we would actually stumble across occasionally people that, you know, were engaging in criminal activity or coming onto the cusp of doing criminal activity, whether it was threats or whether it was teaching criminal tradecraft on the internet, how to obliterate serial numbers off of firearms, how to build a bomb, things like this. A few other things that made us unique is we were actually going out and studying the phenomena of radicalization. How does someone go from being a law-abiding citizen to embracing extremist ideas and then following the path towards violence and criminal activity? And this was something that was unique. There was a lot of interest in the intelligence community and in the law enforcement community on how Muslims radicalize into terrorists. We were doing that for the non-Muslims. And there are some unique differences between how these different groups radicalize. A few other things that I thought were valuable is we were basically the subject matter experts for state and local law enforcement. Someone in Washington who actually returned their phone calls and helped them in any way we could if they had a problem in their jurisdiction with any of these types of extremist groups. And believe it or not, with a lot of the new police officers that are out there and a lot of the new analysts, they're unfamiliar with what types of extremist groups existed in their jurisdictions back in the 90s, and that had since reemerged most recently. So we were doing a lot of valuable work, and what's changed is when this situation happened with my report, the management at DHS decided to stop all of that valuable training, to stop all of the reports that we were writing on various issues dealing with non-Islamic terrorism in the United States. And they eventually dismantled the unit. They reassigned us to other areas. Believe it or not, it was almost, you know, for someone who studied this topic for 20 years, it was somewhat of an insult to reassign me to do Islamic terrorism, which I knew very little about. And so that was what was done with my team. We were dismantled. We were put to use in other areas. And ultimately, because of those circumstances, many of the team members left out of frustration because we could no longer do our work. And so one by one, each of us left, pursued other career ambitions. And what remains is a single analyst who basically is trying to take on the work of what 6 were doing, and we could have used more help at the time. We were pretty much at our limit as far as how much work there was to do in this area. They also have instituted a new restrictive screening process for all the intelligence reports, screening for politically sensitive phrases, things that could be offensive to other people, and they particularly used this screening process and applied it to the domestic terrorism issue, and have let other you know, Muslim extremism issue papers as well as international terrorism issue papers go through with less scrutiny. So this basically is you know, politicizing intelligence, in my opinion, and it's wrong. And I think that you know, something needs to change. And since I've left DHS, basically the lone analyst, sometimes he gets some assistance from a second analyst. So it's fluctuated between 1 and 2 people, depending on, I guess, what they're working on. But that's the current state that we're in. And it's, what's really disturbing to me is that we're here in this, experiencing this massive resurgence in these groups. You know, we've had a number of attacks, which Mark Potok has outlined, and yet at Homeland Security, we have one person looking at this issue. And I just think that, you know, as a nation, you know, we need to have more resources devoted to this.
Thanks, Daryl.